All right, now.
Okay.
Can I just say, Russell, you're well dressed on a day in which you've had 35 degrees and tomorrow is about 40, 41.
I know. I'm sitting with air conditioning. Yes, we have in Melbourne. We're having a hot, but we have a cool change tomorrow evening.
Yes.
We have 2 days. It's been a bit hot here. Okay, now.
Dr. Mark is in, right?
Mark is here. Yes, Mark is already here.
No, I think he had gone out and come in again, so I've admitted
Left
him.
us for a moment.
Yeah.
Hello, Deborah. Yeah.
Mark, you want to do a sound check just to make sure?
Lincoln to allow him in. Is he joining us?
No. No.
We can't hear you, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, because if he comes, we'll let him in. He's got the.
You've muted yourself.
Yeah.
Can you speak so that
okay, if you call,
we cannot hear you?
Thank you for when I introduced him. Yeah, I got it. Thank you so much.
Dr. Mark, whatever you did the last time, you can do it again because we can't hear you now.
So we might. There's still a few minutes, I suppose.
Dr. Sheena is not here. Sheena Egan and Dr. Lincoln.
Lincoln is joining. That Deborah just rang me from Brazil.
Okay.
She is joining apparently.
Dr. Derek?
Yes, tell me.
Derek, when the speakers are speaking, if you can pin them, probably no one else can come in. Have you tried that?
I've tried that. Yes, I'll do.
Yeah, just pin because otherwise, suppose.
No, I'm looking. I can't find him. Sheena.
Okay, Sheena Egan is there.
I'm looking for his name. Is he with? Has he come in another name? Not his phone. I need to know because in the waiting room I can't find Lincoln.
Dr. Sheena, can you see us and hear us?
Yeah.
I can.
Okay. Yes.
And can you see and hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
You're good.
You're good.
Okay. So, hello, Sheena. How are you? I was just trying to call you to see. Yeah, Lincoln is there. Good.
Okay. So
we're all set then.
Only Dr. Alvin, who will come in. We don't know when, but it's okay.
And yeah, from Brazil. So, okay, there we are.
Okay, right. So we have
it's. But I don't know whether
we put
it is him or not.
Who's
There's
that?
another first name.
Dr. Lincoln. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Is he there?
Yes, I see him.
Yes. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Lincoln?
Dr. Lincoln from Brazil here in speaking clearly. I hope you listen to me. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll put my micro off, okay, in order to hear you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lincoln, very good. Very good to see you,
now. Is that right?
Yeah. Dr. Mark, you're having a problem, is it? You're speaking on the phone?
Yes. I am on the phone now.
But you're not able to use the microphone on your computer?
No, I'm using the phone as a runaround until I can fix it. Is this
Can you
acceptable?
just check? Can you just check? It's okay, but can you check your speaker on the computer and see if the volume is up?
Okay, Michelle.
I have done that.
Okay, and you're not able to do it. Okay.
Mark, did you try signing out and then mute the speakers on your computer, then unmute them and sign back in? I know that sounds ridiculous, but it has worked for me.
This is the equivalent of plugging it, unplugging and plugging it back in.
I tried that last year for the whole year and it didn't work, but you know, maybe. I spent the whole year looking
can do that. Yeah, I'll return shortly.
All right.
Okay.
Stay on the phone. That way we've at least got a line to you.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, good.
Dr. Russell, we are exactly on time. Would you like to start?
There are two more.
Who are we waiting for?
No, only Jailal from India and Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. Okay.
I know that KK was joining us from, let's see. Okay, we might start.
They may be there because some are on their cell phones. Yeah.
You tell me when you're ready and I'll start the recording, and Mary, you can admit.
Yeah, yeah. No, you can admit everyone. Dr. Russell, shall we?
Yeah, start. Let's start.
And then we can, okay.
Jailal is there.
All right, I'm admitting everyone.
Okay.
The Indian
so that'll take another couple of minutes in any case.
Okay, Derek, can you make all our speakers co-hosts and mute the others, please?
Yeah.
All the speakers can unmute themselves, so don't worry. We're making you all co-hosts.
All right. We'll start, the others will join in.
Just a minute, all the speakers will have to unmute themselves now. Dr. Russell as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Wait, I'll just start the recording and then you're. Yes, Dr. Russell, we are good to go.
All right. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all of you in Australia. Welcome. This is the start of the 2021 series. As you know, we had a very productive.
Can I just say, Russell, you're well dressed on a day in which you've had 35 degrees and tomorrow.
Yeah, yes. So we had a wonderful program over the last 2020 with 34 or 33 webinars covering every part of this globe. We brought in all the regions and with many disciplines, looking at the interface with health, with economists, with law, with all the other disciplines. And so it was great. And we now look forward to another great program for 21. The world continues to struggle with this pandemic. And again, we continue with our program, and particularly bringing all of us together, recognizing the importance of us coming together with this and coming out of it together. So today we have a very important one, is that we are inaugurating the series 2021 series, and this is the 34th webinar. But very importantly, we also have we start off with the United Nations International Holocaust Remembrance Day that takes place on 27th. And we had some discussions on this, and we focused that this being on Sunday, which is the international panel discussion, we're sort of focusing on the importance. What do we learn from the Holocaust? And indeed, here we focus on the relevance, the contemporary relevance of bioethics and the Holocaust, reflections on the legacy of the doctor's trial at Nuremberg. We were to have that meeting on the 9th of December, but we've now brought this together, and today we are focusing a lot more on practice, research and practice. So we are delighted that we have with us Dr. David Bab, who is the current president of the World Medical Association. But very importantly, David has also been with us on this program, on the UNESCO program, UNESCO Chairs program, while he was the president-elect. And then in October, he took over as the president. So we are delighted to have you, David. And David is going to inaugurate the UNESCO 2021 program, and in particular today's program on the contemporary relevance of bioethics and the Holocaust, reflections on the legacy of the doctor's trial. So that's what we're going to do. But before that, let me introduce first Professor Dr. Mary Matthew, my co-chair in this program, and Colonel Derek DeSouza, Professor Derek DeSouza, who's also the chat. He looks after the moderation of the chat. And we've been doing this now for some time. So I'm going to ask Mary to welcome all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell, and really lovely to see all of you back again in 2021. We had a wonderful 2020 in terms of the webinar and the discussions that we had that kept us all connected together. And here we are again in 2021, starting another round of talks, which are going to help us and meet a lot of people. And today's webinar is the first in this month, and we are delighted to have very distinguished speakers and guests to inaugurate and to talk about the United Nations International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So thank you. I thank all the speakers for some of you who have woken up very early in the morning to attend this webinar. And we want to tell our audience too, if you do have any questions, please do put it in the chat box so that we will address it after the session is over. We have two parts to this webinar today. The first half, we will have our speakers talking about the Holocaust and the various aspects of the Holocaust. And the second half will be a panel discussion. So thank you, Dr. Russell, and back to you.
Derek, is there anything you want to say before
Thank you, Dr. Russell. If you can notice and see, I have put a link into the chat box. That is the live streaming YouTube link of this complete session. So you can easily forward this to any of your friends on WhatsApp or any other social media, and they don't need to register. They can watch it wherever they are. Also, a complete recording of this session will also be visible on this link later on, so you can access it as and when you want. Thank you, and all the best. I'm sure we'll have a wonderful evening ahead.
I want to also acknowledge Professor Amnon Kami, the chair, the head and chairholder of the UNESCO chair, who's here from Israel with us. Welcome, Amnon. Welcome to this program. Now, for all of you to know, we are going to have, after the inauguration and the comments by the president of the World Medical Association, we are going to have 3 short presentations focused on 3 areas, and we have an introduction by Stacy Gallin, who's part of our team here. So that's what we're going to do. So let me introduce to you Dr. David Bob is the president of the WMA from October 2020, and he's been a member of the World Medical Association Council from 2016 to 2019. I'm delighted to introduce and tell you that he's a board-certified family physician from Mountain Grove in Missouri, USA, and was the 172nd president of the American Medical Association from June 17 to June 18. And of course, Dr. Bob has interest in health-related human rights, promoting and defending the basic rights of patients and physicians, and importantly, workplace violence against healthcare providers. And of course, this is not limited only to the United States, and we know that is something that happens around the world. He served as the vice president of the regional operations for Mercy, with responsibility for 4 hospitals, 75 clinics, and more than 200 physicians and advanced practitioners. And of course, Mercy has been named as one of the top 5 large health systems in the United States each year from 16 to 19. And of course, Dr. David has a long history of service to organized medicine. And then have Dr. Ottmar Clover, who is the Secretary General of the World Medical Association. He's known to all of us. He's been several times on the UNESCO program and for many years. But importantly, for all of you who don't know, he has been an international medical relations and collaboration leader for more than 20 years with experience, importantly, on medical ethics, health policy, government affairs, and management of relationships with patients, with other professionals, manufacturers, and indeed medical stakeholders. He has been the chief executive of the World Medical Association since 2005, and indeed prior to this move, he was served as the Deputy Secretary General and Secretary of the German Medical Association. And during this tenure, he was selected as a member of the Study Commission for Law and Ethics of Modern Medicine of the German Bundestag, or the Parliament. So welcome, Ottmar, to this program. I'm delighted now to take you and introduce you to Matt Weiner, who's here with us. He's the director of the Center for Bioethics and Humanities and a professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and Colorado School of Public Health, and works at the Ansuit Medical Campus. I'm delighted to introduce and have him. He got up at 5:30 to allow me in Australia to join you at 11:30, so we're all on the same day. So welcome, Matt. And then I have indeed Dr. Mark Levine, is an internalist at Aurora, Colorado University of at the University of Colorado Hospital. And importantly, he's also the past chair of the Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs at the American Medical Association, and has a long interest in this aspect in bioethics. So welcome, Mark. And I'm now very happy to introduce Professor Ashley Fernandez. Ashley Fernandez is the director at the Center for Bioethics at the Ohio State University College of Medicine, and he's a professor of pediatrics at the Nationwide Children's Hospital. He received his MA in philosophy from Johns Hopkins University and his MD from Ohio State University, and a PhD in philosophy from Georgetown University. And he has an interest in professionalism, educational scholarship, and was appointed as the director of the competency for professionalism at the College of Medicine. So we have our speakers there, and then we have Stacy Gallin, is the director for the Center for Human Dignity in Bioethics, Health and Holocaust at the Misericordia University, and she's also the founder and director of the Maimonides Institute of Medicine, Ethics and Holocaust, and part of our chair, as the co-chair of the Department of Bioethics and Holocaust of the UNESCO chair in bioethics. And Stacy is part of this program on our committee and has been organizing our programs. Before I hand call over, I'd like to quickly introduce the others here. Dr. Professor Baroness Ilora Finlay. She waves out. She's part of our team, but more importantly, she's the past member of the House of Lords of the British Parliament and past president of the British Medical Association and the executive of the BMA. She's a professor of palliative medicine at Cardiff University and has been very important in the area of end-of-life decisions and so forth. So welcome, Ilora. She's also part of our program and our team here. Then we have Dr. Angelique. Angelique is the president of the National Council of the South African Medical Association, and she's a family physician, and she's going to take part as one of the international panel members here. And Professor Dr. Jailal, the new president of the Indian Medical Association, but very long time involved, over 4 years or 5 years involved with the UNESCO program, heads the IMA UNESCO program in India, and he is a surgeon, a very active surgeon and a teacher, professor of surgery. Welcome, Dr. Jailal, into our program today. And we should have Lincoln. Where is our Lincoln Lopez Ferreira from Brazil? I think Lincoln is the president. If I remember, Lincoln, you are the president of the you're currently the president of the Ibero Latin American and Caribbean Medical Federation, and it has also been with the Brazilian Medical Association. So, and he's, I understand you're a gastrointestinal surgeon and former president of the Brazilian Medical Association, and he's going to be an important international panelist for this in the program. And we still have Dr. Alvin Chang, who's from Hong Kong. He's from the International Affairs of the Hong Kong Medical Association, but he's also representing the Confederation. There's Alvin Chan, who is the treasurer and represents the Confederation of the Medical Associations of Asia and Oceania. So that's our panel today. So with this, and of course, Mary Matthew.
Dr. Sheena was introduced.
Oh, yes, sorry. And we have Sheena. I'm extremely sorry. Sheena Egan, Professor Sheena Egan is the ethicist from the Brody School of Medicine in East Carolina University, but she's also head of a unit of the UNESCO chair in bioethics, and she's joining the panel from an ethicist point of view. And we have the presidents of various medical associations are coming from covering all the regions of the world. So that takes us through this whole program of introduction. Now, I'm going to hand this now to David, because I was going to say something about the doctor's trial and the Nuremberg, but I think in more of time, we're going to have David, we're going to have Stacy introduce that. And just for all of you to know, we will have 3 presentations. Very importantly, the first presentation, setting the scene, is going to be by none other than Ottmar, our Dr. Ottmar, the Secretary General, and his presentation is going to be how did doctors' trial at Nuremberg and the creation of the Nuremberg Code impact in the development of the Declaration of Helsinki and the protection of human dignity and human rights. So that will be setting the scene with Dr. Ottmar, Clover from Germany, but from the WMA. And then we'll have Dr. Matthew Weiner and Mark Levine present on how has the legacy of the doctor's trial impacted education in bioethics and healthcare professions. And then we'll have a presentation on how has the legacy of the doctor's trial influenced the rights and responsibilities of physicians, indeed to uphold bioethical values in medical practice. And I said this session is focusing on practice. And so those are going to be our presentations. And now I'm delighted to bring in the very distinguished president of the World Medical Association, Dr. David Bob. Welcome, Dr. David.
Thank you very much, Dr. DeSouza. Very pleased to be with this group again today. Thank you for that invitation. For those of you who may not know, the World Medical Association was established in 1947 in the aftermath of World War II, and to a large degree because of some of the ethical concerns that came up and the atrocities that were committed during that war, some by physicians, as we will discuss today. And as you've also heard referenced, and Dr. Clover will address this, the WMA drafted the first version of the Declaration of Helsinki over 55 years ago, and it is arguably the most comprehensive and most enduring statement on professional physician ethics around research and practice. You know, I think it is particularly important that we pause this week to remember those events because it has been said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we need and we must do everything in our power to keep those type of atrocities from occurring again. So we must learn from history. And discussions like today and that will take place on the 27th, I think are critical. Because as has been mentioned, we must continue to test ourselves regarding the ethics of our research and of our practice, because patients and society do depend on us to hold the highest ethical standards. So it is vital that we hold ourselves and our colleagues accountable. And it is through sessions like this that we can begin and continue to do this. I think this event today and the topic that we are going to discuss point out extremely clearly why this series in bioethics is so vitally important to our profession and to society. And I commend Dr. DeSouza and the many others that work together around the world to sponsor this series and others like it so that we can continue to remind ourselves not only of the atrocities of World War II, but the many other events that physicians have participated in over the years that unfortunately were not of the highest ethical standards. So my hat's off to Dr. DeSouza and his crew and all those that work so hard to keep medical ethics front and center in our minds and in our practices. So with that, Dr. DeSouza, thank you so much, and I look forward to the rest of today's conversation.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. And of course, you inaugurated, we declared this open, and we look forward to a very important but also a productive start for 2021. Thank you very much. And we shall now move to the setting the first. No, first we'll have Stacy is going to give us an introduction, a short introduction into this or the doctor's trial and its place. Over to you, Stacy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to try and share my screen. We will see if it works. Let's see. It is. Derek, it is not allowing me. It's just saying one participant can share at a time, but it's not actually letting me share.
Is there someone else who's sharing, Derek? Stacy, you're the co-host, right?
Can you try now?
There you go.
Still not letting you.
Okay, what you can do is, Derek, can you remove the spotlight?
I've made it.
Can you remove the spotlight? Yeah, try now. Tracy? No? Would you like to send your PowerPoint to Derek?
I mean, I think I could do it without the PowerPoint. It's fine.
Yeah,
And
just a minute.
Go ahead and
wait. Derek is trying to sort it out.
No, it says multiple participant. 1 second, just let me see your status. Just give me a second.
Okay, it's fixed now. I don't know. We're good now. Can everyone see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Make it full screen, Stacy, please. Yeah, good.
Full screen, yes, excellent. Thank you very much. So first and foremost, thank you to Professor Carmi, to Dr. Russell, Dr. Mary, Dr. Derek, and everyone for your hard work and assistance in organizing this important event as we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you so much to Dr. Barbie and Dr. Clover and our esteemed presenters, panelists, and guests for your recognition of this topic and its relevance for modern society. This is something that is a very important topic, and those of us here today firmly believe that it's something that we need to continue to discuss because of its implications for modern society. I'm going to provide just a short background so that kind of we're all starting at the same place, and then my colleagues will take it from there. So I think the most important thing when we're talking about physician participation in the Holocaust is the big question: how could those who took an oath to heal transform into killers? And what are the implications of the systemic participation of medicine for current society? So many people assume that this was just an example of medicine gone mad, or it was, a couple of rogue physicians. But to think that it's a dangerous mistake, because it really ignores, as I said, the fact that this was a systemic problem. This was really ran through the entire thread of medicine and science. So without going too deep into kind of the background and the history of this, I think something that's really important to understand is this paradigm shift in medical ethics that took place in Nazi Germany. There were medical ethics. So many people think that, how could something like this happen? There must have been no ethics at all. But there were medical ethics. It was just a different medical ethics than what we're seeing or what we know of today. The shift in medical ethics from caring for the individual to caring for society supported this idea of subverting individual rights in favor of societal progress. So the idea of the doctor-patient relationship being at the center of medicine, the idea of someone comes to you at their most vulnerable in need of help, that idea was no longer at the heart of medicine. And instead, the idea was, what can be done to strengthen the nation of Germany during this wartime? The scientific or medical ideal of using genetics to better society, the concept of eugenics that most of us are familiar with, and the goal being using science and medicine to gain total control of the biological process of evolution to ensure the health and the strength of the German nation. If you can understand all of that, right, which is, I am obviously oversimplifying this, then it becomes kind of the first step in understanding that physicians were instrumental in instituting a system of identifying, labeling, notifying, transporting, persecuting, and murdering millions of people. Not just Jewish people, but those that were considered unfit, whether they were considered unfit because they were mentally unfit, physically unfit, or racially unfit, right? And that's really, really important to understand, because the idea of labeling, the idea of a hierarchy of human life is really important to understand, both from a historical perspective and from our current issue perspective. So what did physicians during the Holocaust do? Most of the time, people just assume that it was medical experimentation, but it was so much more. As I said, it was the systemic issues. And so here are just a few examples. So I think it's important to understand that there was provided this scientific justification for public policy measures, because when we talk about the systemic, you have to talk from the beginning to the end. So the first bullet point being provided the scientific justification for public policy measures, and the last bullet point being operated the gas chambers that killed millions of innocent victims, and then everything that happened in between. And when we talk about enforcing public policies, right? So we're not just talking about individual practice, we're talking about public policy. That's really important to understand. It's important to understand the reach here, right? It wasn't just, as I said, one doctor here, one doctor there. It was coming everywhere, and it was this confluence of medicine and politics that really made things so dangerous. So after we learn about this abrogation of ethics that took place, people are, understandably shocked. And we have the doctor's trial at Nuremberg. And in the opening of the doctor's trial, we have Chief Prosecutor Brigadier General Telford Taylor, who says the defendants in this case are charged with murders, tortures, and other atrocities committed in the name of medical science. The victims of these crimes numbering hundreds of thousands. So that's the reason why, among the other trials that took place, there was a specific trial just for doctors. That was a really important precedent, because it was important to hold doctors accountable for what happened. This was kind of the recognition that doctors played a huge role in what happened, and that with this great power that enabled them to do these things, they also needed to be held accountable. So what exactly, when we talk about the doctor's trial at Nuremberg, or USA versus Colbrand et al., what are we talking about? So December 9th, 1946, an American military tribunal opened criminal proceedings against 23 leading German physicians and administrators, it wasn't just physicians, for their willing participation. And that's important, willing participation in war crimes and crimes against humanity. These people were not forced. It was willing participation. So after almost 140 days of proceedings, including the testimony of 85 witnesses and the submission of almost 1,500 documents, the American judges pronounced their verdict on August 20th, 1947. During this time, during the proceedings, the defense argued that the experiments conducted by Nazi doctors didn't differ much from previous American or German ones, right? And that they could only be understood in context of German medical ethics. You had to go back and understand, as I said, that there was something called German medical ethics, and that in fact, German medical ethics and German medical education was really at the top of medical education in the world at the time. That there was no international law or code outlining the difference between what was legal and what was illegal. What happened? 16 of the doctors were found guilty and 7 were sentenced to death. Typically in a trial, for any of you, who may have a legal background, what do, right? You say guilty or innocent. But the tribunal here did not only do that, and that's really important. The tribunal did not only focus on the criminality of the physician's behavior, because this was so shocking. This, not just what they were learning from the witnesses and what they were learning from the documentation, but also the idea that something like this could happen, and something like this could happen unchecked. So they attempted to address these broader issues of ethics in medical research, and ultimately established a set of principles of human experimentation, the goal being that it would serve as a code of ethics, but that hopefully also it would be ingrained in international humanitarian law. Andrew C Ivey, testifying for the prosecution in the doctor's trial, said, had the profession taken a strong stand against the mass killing of sick Germans before the war, because remember what I said, right? This wasn't only about killing Jewish people. It is conceivable that the entire idea and technique of death factories for genocide would not have materialized. So he's talking again about this slippery slope, this idea that, it started in one place and no one stopped it. No one stood up and said, this isn't right. So it implies an inherent ethical responsibility on the part of the profession, which then led to the birth of modern bioethics and the creation of the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Declaration of the 2012 German Medical Assembly. Very, very important, right? In contrast to assumptions still widely held today, the impetus for these most grievous violations of human rights did not originate from the political authorities, but from physicians themselves. These crimes were not the acts of individual physicians, but were carried out with the participation of leading representatives of the established medical profession and professional medical societies, as well as with significant involvement by distinguished medical academics, members of renowned biomedical research institutions. These human rights violations committed by National Socialist medicine have left a lasting impact and raised questions concerning the self-perception of physicians, their professional actions, and medical ethics. So again, this was not an example of medicine gone mad, of a few rogue doctors. This was systemic. This was a confluence of medicine and politics, and this left a lasting impact. It still matters today. So why are we doing this program? What is the legacy and what lessons can we learn? We must learn from history. And perhaps more importantly, we must not be indifferent to what is happening today, right? We're always cautious not to overuse the Nazi analogy, but we have to look to the past to inform our current issues in society. Respect for the individual should always be given priority over societal or technological progress. The field of medicine and those who practice it hold great power. And with great power comes great responsibility. We must always remember this fact. We are all members of humankind, entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. However, that also means that we have a responsibility to treat others with dignity and respect. That's true today when we're talking about bioethics, but that's true, I think, across the board. And Holocaust education must transcend boundaries. It's not just something solely about history. It's not just something solely about Jewish history. It's something that matters for everyone. When I spoke about this with Dr. Russell, I said we must include people from all walks of life, from everywhere. We have to have, international, interfaith, intergenerational, interprofessional people represented here today, because it's the history of humankind and the future of humankind. We have to remember the past, we have to protect the future, and we have to act now. So I hope that all of you are here today, will understand what we're talking about, and will use this kind of as a call to action to get more involved. You can see my website over here. We have a nonprofit organization, the Maimonides Institute for Medicine, Ethics, and the Holocaust. We do these programs, enduring programs, because it shouldn't just be on International Holocaust Remembrance Day that we talk about this. It's something that we need to incorporate into medical education and into our education as a whole. Thank you very much for being here. I very much appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Stacy. And we'll now ask, I'll invite the distinguished Professor Dr. Ottmar Clover to make his presentation, setting the scene. And how did the doctor's trial at Nuremberg and the creation of the Nuremberg Code impact the development of the Declaration of Helsinki and the protection of human dignity and human rights? Over to you, Ottmar.
Thank you, Russell, and a very interesting question. And I can make my presentation actually very short. I don't know. That's too short, probably. So let me say a little bit more. I think we all learned the saga as people born after World War II in medical school and in ethics classes, that there is kind of a continuation and a stringency between the Nuremberg trial, the Nuremberg Code, and then the Declaration of Helsinki. And if you look to content, I think there is a very good argument for that, gives the impression that there is indeed kind of a direct line of development. That is something what I have learned, that is something that you find in the literature quite often. But to me, there are a number of question marks, and maybe I can be a little bit provocative in pointing out in a little bit different direction. I think what is very important is the presentation that Stacy has given on the Nuremberg trial. I think I completely share the arguments you have given. This has been a very systemic development, something that has kind of produced a wave in the medical community in Germany, which was massive and certainly carried by many, if not most, of the physicians in Germany at that time, with very, very dark circumstances of enriching themselves, taking away offices from Jewish physicians, into an ethics which was completely twisted by the National Socialist ideology, and separating life that was worth living and others that was not. And as Stacy said, it in the end was directed not only against our Jewish people and Jewish people of other countries, of course, which were then occupied. It was also directed against other ethnicities which were living in Europe, Sinti and Roma, which were suffering from this, but also homosexuals, for instance, or communists or socialists, which were incarcerated, which were abused, which were tortured, and which were used for very dubious medical experiments. And the bestiality of that time is still understandable for me, at least. So in 1945, the medical leaders from a number of countries, from about 2,000 countries, met in London for the first time to meet for setting up a new medical association, because the old one, the Association Professionnelle Internationale des Médecins in Paris, stopped working with the beginning of World War II. And they started to create a new medical association. And it was in the time between especially 46 and 47 then that there were intensive discussions about this association, what it should do, what it should be, how it should work. And it was finally founded exactly 1 month after the verdicts in the Nuremberg case on September 18th of 1947. And for the next years, the abuse of medicine in my own country, in Germany, became the core part of the discussions for the World Medical Association, including the fact that there was a number of members then, of the new members of this new organizations, which didn't like the idea that Germany ever should be a part of this organization. And it took then until the beginning of the 50s that finally the German Medical Association could enter the World Medical Association and could become a member of that organization, after very clearly distancing itself from the Nazi past. Now that was on paper for most of it, because there was a continuity of elites in my country. And you have seen that this very important statement from the German Medical Assembly was from 2012. So that's just 9 years ago, that there finally was a process which took over 20 years in dealing with those questions, came to this conclusion. And it's not an end, it's still a process that is going on. Now in Germany, and I think that is also very important, and that's not only in Germany, that is probably true for many other countries, there have been very clear ideas about patient autonomy, actually, and self-determination, but also about the rules of medical experimentation before. In Germany, actually, in 1894, the Imperial Court of Germany very clearly defined the patient autonomy, and that a doctor can not do anything against a patient's will, whether that is an experiment or even a very benevolent treatment. And there was a very excellent case showing this at its extremes, where a doctor virtually saved the life of a child, although the father had denied the doctor to operate the child. And yet the doctor in the end was sentenced because he acted against the will of the patient, in this case, the legal representative of that girl. So this was very clear, and it was then even more clear in 1900 when the Prussian government made a very clear regulation on medical experimentation, again saying that people have to have their free will given and their free consent given to be part of experimentation, of any experimentation, which was then after an incident with a vaccination, with a BCG vaccination in Lübeck in Germany, where 77 children died, was reaffirmed that there has to be a consent in order to go into an experimentation or into any type of medical medical treatment. So all of this, which was a very clear system of protection, which was there, suddenly vanished when it came to the question of experimentation of these racial and very twisted ideas within the Nazi time. And as Stacy rightfully said, that was something that was carried systematically. It was not just a few weird people who did this. I think there was a big misunderstanding of that this was okay and could be done. By the way, in a time where the Nazis had the strictest animal protection law that ever has been on this planet, which basically forbid any animal experimentation for medical purposes. At the same time, I mean, this is weird and very difficult to understand. Now, my question now was, how did this evolve now from the Declaration of, from the Nuremberg Code into the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964? And the first question I came above myself, why took it so long from 47 to 64 to have these guidelines for experimentation? Well, actually, the first draft was made by the Medical Ethics Committee of the World Medical Association in 61. And of course, you can also say there were other things that had to be done, like, for instance, the Declaration of Geneva, with the Doctor's Pledge that was in 1948, the first International Code of Medical Ethics in 1949. But then still there is a huge gap of many years where obviously after discussing all these weird things in the Third Reich, nothing happened. And so my question was, why did it take so long? And when I finally had the chance to dig into the archive of the World Medical Association, being there in Ferney myself at the office, I got a little bit curious, and I was wondering which impact did the Nuremberg trial really have on the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, looking to the content, I think that is very clear. There is a continuum of ideas about protection, informed consent, non-maleficence, beneficence, that is clearly in those documents in there. But what made the gap? And why couldn't I find any hint in the creation of the Declaration of Geneva to the Nuremberg Code? So that is something that to me is still a puzzle which I've now solved. I have discussed with several times with scholars who came to our office looking into our archive, and where they were saying, as historians, there is a clear line of development between the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki. And I said, you know, if you go to our archive, I would really ask you to look whether you can find any hint in the development of the Declaration of Helsinki that there is giving reference to the Nuremberg Code. There is none. There is a single mentioning of the Nuremberg Code in one of the sessions of the Ethics Committee in 1961, I believe. But otherwise, as it is the usual tradition that you give in your considerations, in the whereases, some hint of your source of your action there, it's very difficult to see any relation there. Now, in a discussion with Andreas Fravor and Rolf Schmidt, who have been looking into this very closely into this development, there is obviously a personal relationship between one of the advisors of the court, of the experts, I'm not sure whether it was Ivey or Alexander, who was a father-in-law of one of the drafters of the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, that may be a relation there, but still I would have expected that there is kind of a consideration that brings back to the Nuremberg Code. The other things what I often see is, or what is I think is important to notice, is that the Nuremberg Code, which is, by the way, not an international document, it's an American document by an American court, because the doctor's trial was a purely American, it was not an international court. It was an American court. And even in the US, and I'm not aware of any other places, this document has not been used as a formal reference for structuring, for allowing, evaluating medical experimentation. the legacy of the Nuremberg Code then comes back in the 70s with historical publications on the doctor's trial, and the relation then is being seen, is being built, is being written between the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki. So it leaves me with a puzzle, why it took so long, why there is no direct reference and direct link to that. And for me, it's probably more important to look into the spirit and the meaning of the Nuremberg Code for the further development of the Declaration of Helsinki after 64, the changes that have later been made in 75, and the following years. We have now, I think, 9 revisions of that in total of the Declaration until the final one from 2013. All of those clearly have been discussed before the background of the Nuremberg Code, which then became much more prominent and much more noticed. But, and maybe that gives a second pitch to this whole thing. One of the most important learnings from the Nuremberg trials and from this historic moment for medical ethics is probably that we have learned that a doctor cannot hide behind laws. And that is what the court really has told the doctors, is you cannot hide behind what your government tells you, even not behind laws and orders from government you get, if they are clearly violating ethical principles that are being set out and which have been set out before in medical ethics. To me, I think this is, and it's overarching, it does not only apply to medical ethics. To me, this is probably the most important learning from this trial, that there is always an individual responsibility that cannot be waived by laws, because laws themselves can also be wrong, as we have seen, and that each of us has this obligation to look into what is ethical and what not for himself. And you cannot get a waiver by whatever your government says. So my conclusions are two. The importance of the Nuremberg Code for the Declaration of Helsinki probably is much stronger in the time after the first edition, in the time from 1975 until 2013 with the last revision there. I think it had much more impact through literature, through the scientific discussions with them. And second, the impact of the Nuremberg trial to medical ethics and to the meaning and importance of medical ethics reaches far beyond the research application of the Nuremberg Code, but reaches into our everyday life to look what is ethical and what we really can justify when dealing with our patients, but also our communities. Back to you, Russell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ottmar. That was indeed enlightening. I'm delighted that you actually went and looked in the archives and made got that nexus or connection. So thank you very much. That sort of set the scene. And now I'm delighted to bring our distinguished Dr. Matt Weiner and Dr. Mark Levine, who are going to bring in the connection with teaching, I think, that how did it impact on education of bioethics and in the healthcare profession. Over to you, both Matt and Mark.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russell, and a special thanks to Stacy Gallen, by the way, for having introduced us only recently. I feel very honored to be a part of the presentations today. And Ottmar, that was an amazing presentation, really very helpful. So we've been asked, Mark and I, to say a few words about how the legacy of the doctor's trial has affected education in the health professions and in bioethics. And one way to break this question down is to think about the impact of the trial on how we teach the ethics of medical research, and then on how we teach the ethics of medical practice, because it's really been, it's had very different impacts in those two domains. And each of those brings out some educational challenges that are posed by trying to teach this history. So I'm going to speak a little to the former, and then Dr. Levine is going to jump in and talk about some of the ways in which our institution has tried to address the educational challenges posed by teaching this history. So let me start with how this affects research and the teaching of the ethics of research in health sciences. And I imagine this is true in a number of other countries, but certainly in the US, there is mandatory training on research ethics. So if you do research on human subjects, there's a requirement, a federal legal requirement, that you be retrained on this topic on a regular basis. So, so I've taken this training from a couple different providers over many different years. And I can say it always starts with Nuremberg and with the medical crimes of the Nazi doctors. So this is a part of the sort of preamble to the training for medical researchers. And it's typically in sort of a section that addresses why do we need special attention to the ethics of human subjects research. And in some cases, Nuremberg is the entire argument that is mentioned in terms of why we need research ethics. Not usually, usually there's a little bit more, but I would say the typical path here is that we see Nuremberg portrayed as sort of the terrible origin of the need for research ethics training. And then that terrible origin is followed by some additional sort of confirmatory experiences, like the US Public Health Service study at Tuskegee, or the Willowbrook experiments, or the Acres of Skin, the Army experiments, all post-World War II, post-Nuremberg, that sort of confirm why it is that it's important for us to train researchers on the ethics of research. And in general, it's, I would say, uncommon for research ethics training to start any earlier than the Nuremberg trials, although many, if not all of the people on this webinar are going to know that you easily could start with research ethics prior to Nuremberg. Dr. Clover mentioned a couple of instances in which you could have started the history. You could start at Stateville Prison, which was one of the experimental investigations that was sort of laid out as a counterpoint by the defense attorneys at Nuremberg. You could start with Walter Reed's famous yellow fever experiments. There are many others, right? So one way I think in which the Nuremberg trial affects training in research ethics is that it placed such a strong marker in the timeline of the development of research ethics, which is important. But it's also the case that that big marker has probably prevented some training programs from really seeing the larger arc of the evolution of research ethics internationally. And of course, as has sort of been alluded to, and I'm sure we will hear more about this, just because we often date the origins of formal considerations of research ethics to the Nuremberg Code does not mean that researchers actually paid attention to that code when they went on to design research trials, right? So many people famously ignored the Nuremberg Code, thinking it applicable only to the Nazi monsters for whom it was written, but not applicable to themselves because they were fine, upstanding human beings and they couldn't possibly be accused of doing the kinds of things Nazis did. So, so that's a word about how it has affected training on research ethics. Now let me say how it has affected training on the ethics of medical practice. And here, it's actually harder to see the clear connections. And in part, that's because so few medical training programs explicitly or intentionally teach about the legacy of the Holocaust for medicine. A few years back, we did a survey of every medical school in the United States and Canada, and only, there are 140 at the time, only 22 of them, that's 16%, had any regular required curricular elements addressing the roles of physicians in the Holocaust. So, so we don't tend to talk about the role of doctors in the Holocaust or other health professionals when teaching the rest of medical ethics. We've sort of segregated it out as being applicable to research, but not to everything else. And yet, as you all know, the Nuremberg trial was not only about research. Most importantly, I suppose, it was about physician leadership of the T4 euthanasia program, which was not a research program, right? Stacy described some of this. But because the research crimes addressed at the trial were so heinous, this other part of the Nuremberg trials has really been at risk of becoming a lost part of this history. And despite this, I'm going to assert that the racist and eugenic ideologies that led to the T4 program are arguably more important for students to learn about today, because that aspect of this history probably has the broader impacts on how we think about medical practice and the ethics of medical practice. So this history, not the research ethics piece, but the piece about the ideology of medical practice, should inform modern debates about economic and social forces, about race and racism, about genetic testing, about public health practice, about physician involvement in prisoner interrogations, about involvement in executions, about end-of-life decision-making. Many issues should be informed by a knowledge of this history, and currently it is not always, because we don't tend to use the legacy of health professional involvement in the Holocaust as part of our routine training on medical practice ethics. So let me stop by just comparing these two, because I think it's a really interesting sort of juxtaposition here, that often the trial's impacts on the area where it has had the most importance, i.e. medical practice, has been kind of latent. It's not talked about, it's not discussed, and yet our shared knowledge of this history has powerful effects on how we think about the ethics of medicine today. And by contrast, the trial's impact on research ethics is not latent. It's very obvious, it's taught, and you could argue, in fact, it's kind of been overblown because it did not have as much impact on research ethics as many people might have thought. So teaching that juxtaposition, that irony, in a sense, that the area where we think about Nuremberg the most, research ethics, is the area where it may have had the least impact. And the area where we talk about it the least, which is medical practice and the ideology of what it means to be a doctor, we don't talk about Nuremberg that often, but it probably influences the way we think more so than in any other domain. So let me turn over to Mark to talk a little about how our program has addressed those tensions.
Thank you, Matt. Matt's mentioned the small number of medical schools in North America that require teaching the lessons from the participation of medical professionals in the Nazi era atrocities. At the University of Colorado, we have recognized the necessity that health professional students learn the lessons of the history and have accepted the challenge of treating it, of teaching it. Yet teaching it is not easy. Not only is the content voluminous and complex, it is also difficult to find faculty with sufficient expertise who are prepared to teach it. And it's difficult also for the students to comprehend the enormity of the atrocities perpetrated by the medical professionals, and to grasp that as aspiring professionals themselves, they are subject to similar influences and pressures to those that resulted in the abhorrent behavior of Nazi-era health professionals. And it wasn't just physicians. One of the most challenging issues to deal with is the small amount of dedicated curricular time devoted to ethics and professionalism, and the even smaller amount of time, if any, that's devoted to the teaching of medical history. Our program is multi-professional. and is taught not only to medical students, also to students of dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, physical therapy, public health, and other disciplines, and also on other campuses of the university and to the broader public. We present an annual cycle of activities, including a student writing contest and multiple campus and community educational opportunities. There's an annual International Day of Remembrance lecture, which actually will be held later this week on January 27th. And then during the April National Week of Remembrance for Victims of the Holocaust, we invite nationally recognized keynote speakers to participate, national and internationally recognized keynote speakers to participate in several days of activities such as lectures and panel discussions, community events, art gallery exhibits, and musical performances across multiple University of Colorado campuses. The focus of these programs extends beyond the Holocaust to also address other genocides. The program benefits from stewardship by an advisory group, which includes academicians, but also community members, students, clinicians, staff, and members of partner organizations. There's also a group of community members and academicians that meets regularly to discuss the lessons of the Holocaust and produces writings, panel discussions, and other programming to increase student and public awareness of the lessons. Among the lessons that have been identified are the commitment to science, the necessary balance of clinical detachment with empathy, and the need to manage competing loyalties without loss of professionalism. Our program includes an evolving set of specific learning objectives. This helps us to meet standards for curricular content on cross-cultural awareness, health inequity, and ethics, and also graduate medical education core competencies related to patient care and professionalism. We recognize the critical importance of buttressing our professionalism with teaching as many of these important lessons as we can. No program teaching the lessons of the Holocaust can address all of the overwhelming number of perspectives, influences, and lessons that are important to learn. Many scholars have devoted their lives to this and still consider their learnings incomplete.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that was very good. So now, Mark, we will now move to Ashley, Professor Ashley Fernandez. You're going to talk to us, present the legacy. How did the legacy of the doctor's trial impact education? No, you're going to be presenting on the actual legacy influencing the rights and responsibilities of physicians to uphold the bioethical values in medical practice. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. Thanks again to Stacy. It's been amazing so far. I've learned so much. I'm totally honored to be on this panel with all of you. I am going to try to share my screen now. So give me 1 second. Can you all see that?
Yes, yes.
Great. So I'm going to focus on the clinical aspects of this and how the legacy of the doctor's trial might allow us to see a way forward in looking at our clinical responsibilities and how that impacts the doctor, the nurse, the healthcare professional, and why this subject is of such great import. First, I want to start by having you all look at this picture of Dr. Karl Brandt. And while I'm going through this, I want you to listen to his words that he gave in his defense at the doctor's trial. And I want you to think about what he's saying and whether or not this sounds persuasive to you as I scroll through these images. This is what he says: the human beings who cannot help themselves and whose tests show a life of suffering are to be given aid. This consideration is not inhuman. I never felt that it was not ethical or was not moral. But one thing seems necessary to me, that if anybody wants to judge the question of euthanasia, he must go into an insane asylum and he should stay there with the sick people for a few days. Then we can ask him two questions. First is if he himself would like to live like that. And second, whether he would ask one of his relatives to live that way, perhaps his child or his parents. Now, I start with those words to show you that when I teach this subject to medical students, they actually find some of these words persuasive, and it's not uncommon for them to say such words cross their mind and it's persuasive. These are not the words of a monster. They are not the words of a crazed lunatic, as Stacy alluded to. These are intuitively persuasive, and they continue to resonate throughout the world today among clinicians. And if we find this distasteful, and we want to condemn at least the spirit and the words of Karl Brandt, then clinicians have to have an answer that originates within the very nature of medicine itself. So it has been 75 years since the Nuremberg doctors' trial began, marking a formal end to an era when medicine, by commission or omission, sanctioned the murder of the outsider. And medicalized genocide, sifted and rarefied through centuries-old cultural anti-Semitism and prejudice, a dogmatic and purely materialist anthropology, and a medical and scientific establishment that prized efficiency and racial purity above all else, caused the death of at least 150 to 200,000 human persons between 1939 and 1945. This UNESCO webinar and panel today is an attempt to fulfill that challenge that Telford Taylor stated so eloquently in his opening statement for the prosecution at the doctor's trial when he said, quote, "We cannot rest content when we have shown that crimes were committed and that certain persons committed them. These were not ignorant men. Most of them are trained physicians and some of them distinguished scientists. It is our deep obligation to all peoples of the world to show why and how these things happened." The image you're seeing now is from an Australian stamp, and it's sponsored by the World Medical Association, and it was meant to honor the healing commitment of the physician. And look at the words by Victor Brack, the T4 administrator. His motto was this: "The syringe belongs in the hands of the physician." And this is something my colleague and friend Daniel Sulmazy has pointed out convincingly and recently, that medicine is a power with authority, a power that seeks by its nature to control the human body, and therefore power is also a profound temptation. Sulmazy points out the deep significance of Brack's words. The Nazis knew full well that with the innate power of medicine, what they viewed as racial cleansing became the responsibility of the physician and the physician alone. That is precisely why medicine cannot be defined by science alone. So when you think about what the scientific method is, it's an observation in nature. A hypothesis is generated from that observation. Empirical experiments are created to try to falsify or nullify that hypothesis. And when you can't, it becomes a theory and science moves forward. None of that can answer the question of whether medicine, clinical practice, basic sciences are, quote, good or not good as an evaluative or moral term. Medicine can't be defined by science alone because it involves relationships and it involves an interaction with the human person. This is precisely why someone like Albert Einstein himself said, we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. And it should make us wary of phrases that we hear even today when we say, you should, quote, follow the science, thank you, science says to do this, as if science has become now this omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent person, which we cannot question. Medicine and science, with all of their power, still need moral philosophy and ethics precisely because they act on a human person. Now, in addition to power, the physician then finds himself, as I've suggested, in a relationship with another person and publicly commits to the good of that person. This is the nature of the profession, to publicly commit to an oath of service. So the bioethical values of the medical profession are sustained within the physician-patient relationship, with the doctor promising to act for the good of the patient. And then the question becomes, what does the good of the patient actually mean? My mentor and the late Edmund Pellegrino, Dr. Edmund Pellegrino from Georgetown, had outlined 4 historic goods that the physician has always sought. The good as the patient sees it, that is patient autonomy, the biomedical or physiologic good of the person, the good of the person as a person, that is what promotes their human flourishing, and finally, the spiritual good of the person. And if you look at those 4 things on the screen on your left, it's pretty clear that medical education today, at least in the United States, focuses almost primarily on those top 2 things. But in spite of that, the clinician is meant to look at all 4 goods, and nowhere in this list of goods are things like health systems, the benefit of one race, culture, or ethnicity over another, or political entities. So this is the goods of the patient that the physician is supposed to seek is not an innocuous fact. In fact, physicians have an ethical responsibility to uphold the rights of the vulnerable patient, perhaps especially when they are threatened by the priorities of health systems, cultures, and political entities. Nowhere is the physician supposed to look out for efficiency above the patient's good, or cost cutting above the patient's own good, or this race, this citizenship, this particular culture over another. Nowhere does it say we should yield to pressure from governments to euthanize, to sterilize, to vilify, to torture, or to condemn, all for some other good. The doctor's trials mark the beginning of a moral reckoning for the medical profession, which has to continue. These moral lessons of the Holocaust must be seen as dynamic, nimble, ever-changing, guiding us at once to navigate the future of medical ethics and to reflect and recommit to medicine's authentic foundations. Remembering the persons who suffered in the Shoah points backwards and forwards simultaneously. It both deepens our appreciation for what was, but also for what ought to be. Remembrance is vital to honor the victims and survivors of medical experimentation and genocide, and to repersonalize, to restore forever the recognition of inherent dignity that was transiently but seriously eclipsed. Now, if any of you go to Washington, D.C. and you visit the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, you'll receive a passport, what they call a passport, as you begin to walk through, and it briefly tells the story of a victim of the Holocaust, complete with the person's picture. The resonance of this visual and historical remembrance cannot be understated. Remembrance of this sort can be viewed as a moral imperative of accountability that also teaches us and in the process changes us. But for those of you like me that are involved in clinical care, remembrance also has to point forward. In medical education, we're always fond of the notion of promoting this idea of the clinical, quote, lifelong learner, end quote, but much rarer, as Matthew and Mark have pointed out, is that concept applied to moral learning. The farther we move in history away from physician atrocities in the Holocaust, and as the last survivors pass into history, the more apt we are to forget them, or worse, to want to forget them. In one recent survey of adults under 40 years of age, 63% did not know that 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust, and nearly half could not even name a single concentration camp. So I've already called for universal required Holocaust education in every medical school, because I believe that reading and teaching the narratives of men and women who suffered at the hands of physicians can remind us of what our authentic responsibilities are, that power is not abstract, and that a sharpened and free conscience can move us ever forward in what medicine ought to be. Power cuts both ways. As we've seen, the physician can tragically and easily demean and destroy, and when this happens, it has an amplified effect precisely because of the societal reverence for our profession. And yet, the physician also has the ability to perform an outsized good through humility, kindness, patience, integrity, and generosity of spirit. For this reason, the rights and responsibilities of physicians to uphold the bioethical values in society rather than of society should be reaffirmed with intention. For the values of the profession, just like the nature of the human person, is indeed transcendent. They are both aspirational and inspirational. My hope is that education in medical ethics after the Holocaust for clinicians will be seen as our moral aid in truly advocating for the rights and dignity of patients, particularly those deemed vulnerable or even disposable in our society today. Perpetual remembrance of our profession's role in the Shoah is the atonement that we must make to preserve and advocate for all bioethical values in the future. And that is all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you very much. Very interesting, very thoughtful, provoking. Now that brings us to the three very important presentations and Stacy's introduction, setting this particularly after that Clover's Ottmar's setting the scene. So thank you once again to Dr. Ottmar, Clover, Dr. Stacy Gallen, Dr. Mark Levine, Dr. Matthew Weiner, and of course Professor Dr. Ashley Fernandez. Now we've had this good grounding, as it were, and it's now I'm delighted to ask Dr. Mary, the moderator, and we're going to be now looking at the panel, and we have a very distinguished panel representing the medical workforce or the medical associations from most of the regions of the world. We have the Confederation of Asia and Oceania, we've got the Latin America and Caribbean, and then we've got South America, India, United Kingdom, UK, with Baroness Finlay, and and of course we'll have Sheena, the ethicist, coming in together. So can I now hand it over to Dr. Mary to take this role over? We do have a theme there that we thought we'll put across, the ethical implications of the participation of the medical community in the abrogation of ethics that took place during the Holocaust continues to have ramifications for current issues in research ethics, medical practice, public policy, and human rights endeavors throughout the world. Let's hand it over to Mary and let's look at what we learned from this and its application to the medical fraternity around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Russell, and thank you to all our speakers. It was really a beautiful session and an eye-opening session, especially what Dr. Ottmar had put out a different viewpoint, a different look about the Nuremberg trials and the Helsinki Declaration. And we'd like to focus in this part, this last 1 hour, on to focus especially on medical education. And we have with us 6 panelists who will be discussing on the role of medical education and bioethics and where we are in the various countries. So may I request Dr. Jayalal? Dr. Jayalal is the president of the Indian Medical Association. Is Dr. Jayalal there?
I'm just checking. Dr. Jayalal, if you can hear us and switch on your video, you'll come to the front. No, I don't think he's in the meeting right now. You can carry on, Dr. Mary.
Okay. Yeah. We'll move to the second speaker, Dr. Angelique Coetzee. She's the president, National Council of South African Medical Association. Dr. Angelique.
Good afternoon. And again, thank you for asking, Sama. And thank you for the very, very informative discussion that we had so far. From Sama's side, I'm going to bring it back to today. and what we are facing today and seeing today, learning from what happened during the Nuremberg trials and during 1945. So one of the questions would be, so from 1945 up until 2021, did we really make a huge progress, especially for public to understand, for governments, especially departments of defense, to understand the atrocities and genocides that are still taking place across the world? Have they ever listened? Did they learn from this? If I can come back, and there was a very good paper by Dr. Tessa Shalush, and that actually illustrates in the current pandemic, now I'm bringing it back to the pandemic of the COVID-19, how difficult it becomes for doctors to quote her, there was nothing more important for our patients than knowing that we would be there for them on the following day. That, of course, would have been the most important assurance for us to say, if you bring that back into the current situation where we are struggling all across the world with a pandemic of COVID-19 diseases, doctors also, again, is in a position where they need to make decisions. Who's going to get the treatment? Who's going to die? And do they have enough resources? And that brings you back to the thing, at least I'm there for the patient. I'm not sure whether I would be there tomorrow. I'm not sure whether this patient would be there tomorrow. So I think we need to learn from the past. We need to bring it back. And I think there's still too many countries still having, behind the scenes, committing atrocities towards their people of their countries. And again, military, on the military and defense side, we also need politicians. They need to be held accountable as well. Cannot only be doctors, but the society as a whole should be held responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Angelique. Just a question regarding South Africa and medical education. Is research ethics, or rather the Nuremberg Code and what we heard, the Holocaust, being taught in the medical education as a reference for being an ethical doctor or an ethical physician?
I don't think that is happening at the scale that it should be happening. This is the field, especially of my dear friend, Prof. Ames Dye, and Prof. Shabir is here as well, Dean of one of the medical schools, actually one of the biggest medical schools in South Africa, Wits. And I think it's extremely important for the students to learn what happened. Of course, again, it's happening behind the scenes. It's still carrying on. It's still happening behind the scenes, although not at this, not at the in the same way that it happened in the Holocaust times. But I can promise you, it's still there. It's not there, and we need to educate our doctors, especially young ones. They need to understand the history. They need to understand ethics. I think ethics is a field, especially in South Africa, that is very much neglected. Thanks.
Yes. But we do agree that have we really learned from the Holocaust or the lessons, the historical lessons? Are we learning, or is it just being ignored and we're just carrying forward with the same thing all over again?
I think there's a sort of a resistance in learning.
Yes.
People listen to it, they hear it, but it doesn't come into their hearts and into their minds. It doesn't become part of themselves because it's always someone else. It's always around me, and it's not close enough to me or my family to really become an advocacy for what should happen.
Yeah, that's true, because when the medical students come in their first year, if they are not taught to be ethical, then probably it becomes difficult in later years to add on a program on ethics.
But it should not only be learned at medical school. You should be learned at home. It starts at home, where you need to learn responsibility and taking care of other people. And then it makes it easier as when you go into a medical field or become a doctor or a nurse, then to use your skills that has been drilled into you from a very young age, to accept it and make it part of your life, of your motto every day. And again, I think what Einstein said, intellectuals, it doesn't always mean that you have the emotional IQ to have compassion. And without compassion, you're actually nothing.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Angelique. I want all the viewers and our speakers and panelists to know that UNESCO does have a youth program on ethics, which starts even at the school level. So that is a very beautiful initiative that this chair has helped to develop. Thank you very much, Dr. Angelique. May I ask Dr. Baroness Findlay?
Laura.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this has been possibly one of the most important of these amazing series of webinars that you've put on, because it actually anchors us back in our history. And I think we must also recognize that the event, as was outlined by our speakers, of the Holocaust was on a trajectory. Before the Holocaust, abnormality was viewed as inferior, and that was a widespread view, and much of medicine was aimed at trying to correct things which were viewed as inferior. Children with abnormalities were subjected to terrible treatments for which there was absolutely no evidence base whatsoever, and were cruel and ostracized in society. And then we had this terrible systematized exclusion of initially of those with disorders, so-called abnormalities, just the variation in society. And then of course that then went on, and it was particularly terrible for anyone of any kind of Jewish connection. So people who had any kind of Jewish ancestry. But then I do worry that as we've moved forward, we still haven't recognized the intrinsic worth and value of each human being. And we still make value judgments, particularly in relation to disability. And that goes through our society. So people who have profound disability or even mild disability will hear people say things like, it must be awful to be like you. It must be terrible to have a problem with continence. How awful to have to use a wheelchair, and so on, despite all of the movements like the Paralympics and so on. And I think that explains too, and I would suggest rightly, why so many of the groups with disability, like Not Dead Yet and so on, are really terrified that the society in which they live is not today giving the support to live well, but is actually in some parts of the world now offering them the option of physician-administered euthanasia as a solution to their problems. And sadly, there have been some cases, even now during the pandemic, where isolation in the pandemic has been used as a reason for ending life. They're individual cases, but I don't think we can pretend that this is consigned to history. Yeah. The Holocaust threw it into stark relief of how rapidly it can spread, but that mindset is there, I'm afraid, within our societies. And doctors emerge from societies. They they come from society, they go to medical school, and we have a chance to alter their views and educate them and widen their vision. But then they go back and work in society. And I think, as has been said, lifelong learning and awareness is essential. So if I look at the UK, we have, I think we are extremely good actually at research ethics. I think that lesson has been learnt very thoroughly. But I do worry about some of these subliminal, unconscious biases that are there so often, and that people don't even acknowledge that they have an unconscious bias against one group or another. And that unconscious bias is influencing their thinking.
Yeah. Baroness Finlay, a question regarding medical curriculum. Because I did listen to, I was part of a webinar in one of the UK medical ethics topics. And one of the students did say, I learned about ethics only after I started doing my PhD. And they said, I mean, she said that she was not aware of this when she was in medical school. Do you think there's a need for us to look into this and, start at the beginning or even earlier?
I would completely agree with you. And actually in schools, in many schools now, there are studies about human relationships and morality and ethics, and those thoughts are coming in. I think one of the difficulties is that the medical school curriculum is crowded. And whilst they all have medical ethics in there, it's whether it's actually absorbed into that student's reality as they're studying. We all know that there will be students who'll go through and think they haven't been taught anything about one thing or another, because actually, as they went through, in part, they ignored it themselves. I think the need to learn is the most potent driver to learning. And when clinicians have to take difficult decisions, that forces them to think. What worries me is if they don't have a good foundation, that decision making can become distorted, and it becomes harder then to move it.
Yeah, and I think this pandemic has brought the issue of ethics really to the forefront, because now we are taking very, very difficult decisions.
Yeah, people are taking,
and we probably aren't equipped to make these decisions.
No, I think that actually we have, during the pandemic, we really must admire our clinicians who have struggled to make sure that they are making sound decisions, who are struggling to communicate with their patients despite all of their PPE being behind masks. I know, for example, that at Imperial College, and it's actually my own daughter who's a consultant in emergency medicine, and she has instigated compassion as a main poster in the emergency department to remind patients we are here for you, and to support staff in delivering compassionate care to the individual who is alone, who is frightened, whose family aren't there. So, and then you hear about hospitals where oxygen levels are running right down, and people have been having to decide rapidly, how do they ration this resource? How do they do it? How do they manage 150% ITU that normally ran at 80% occupancy, and so on? So I think that we must recognize that clinicians have really been trying hard, and they need support, and they need to be praised for what they're doing, not criticized for what they're doing. But going forward in our society, the very lessons that our presenters showed us today are ones that we must not let society forget, because oddly enough, I don't think it is a slippery slope. I don't think it's downhill. I think it's a gradual incrementation. It's the boundaries get wider and wider and more gets caught in. That's what happened at the beginning of the Holocaust. Initially, handicapped children, people with mental illness, people with learning difficulties, and so on. And it rapidly broadened. It escalated. It was like a mountain growing up out of the sea that captured everybody. So I don't think it's really a slope, which means going downhill. I think it's a hideous extension that is dangerous.
Okay. Thank you very much, Baroness Finlay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I ask, Dr. Alvin is there? Dr. Alvin from Hong Kong. Dr. Alvin is the president of the Confederation of Medical Association of Asia and Oceania.
Yes.
Can we see you, Dr. Alvin?
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
There you are.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. You have chaired the meeting so well. I have learned a lot from the presentations. And in fact, I had my thoughts that, in fact, what we saw, especially from COVID-19, that had disturbed or deranged a lot about our medical researches and clinical duties in our ordinary practices in the medical profession a lot. Say last year, of course, we have the turbo engine of the researchers in the COVID vaccines development, and then the special use of some medicines, like the medicine of Regeneron, not really scientifically completing the studies, and it had been used, especially on the President, Mr. Donald Trump at that time. So these are all the things that had been made quite unusual before. And these are, of course, now visible under our eyes. So I think it's important that the lessons learned from the Holocaust and what had been done during the Second World War too, that doctors and policymakers could make a lot of exceptions or de novo practices in pandemic or such critical health crisis at this moment. And so we need to be careful as well, not to repeat the mistakes done before in good name. I mean, we've done so many things. The defense in the Nazis, they had claimed themselves to be doing the things in good intention, perhaps, quote unquote. The same is like those Japanese doctors helping the 731 incidents was done in China at that time during the Japanese occupation of China. At that time, it's also very controversial. But of course, it's different in a way that while the Nazi doctors had been penalized with their crimes being judged, well, the Japanese doctors at that time, they were judged with a different result, all right? They were not penalized. So it depends on the courts, you see, and all the evidence and the eloquence of the prosecutors and the defendants. So I read from the Wikipedia, of course, how Dr. Alexander, Dr. Ivey at that time have been so eloquent and put forward their arguments so convincingly. And so the court had been on their side, all right? But so this is very controversial still. That means in Japan's case, they were not penalized, all right? Yes. So world is like this. So what I mean is, while the truth could be difficult to be confirmed sometimes, just like what had been happening in America, we still outsiders could not know what's wrong or not. But then as a pediatrician, I applauded the courage and the dignity of the pediatricians in America last year who signed as a conjoint effort to, disagree with Donald Trump's policies or decisions against his solutions to approach to the COVID-19 at that time. I mean, how he is, Mr. Donald Trump was quite, at that time, demonstrated to be not following the scientific evidence or guideline at that time. And also the editors of the New England Journal of Medicine had concerted efforts to denounce what Mr. Donald Trump had done at that time. So in fact, doctors of the medical professions could have solidarity, could have a joint efforts to give our voice for justice and action as well. But we have to be very careful on which side of the battle we are giving the influence to the population. So we must be very prudent and think twice or thrice before we have the action. And of course, in the researches and the clinical disease, I totally agree what the eloquent speakers tonight had presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to leave early tonight because I have an emergency call from the hospital.
Thank you, Dr. Alvin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alvin. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be grateful if the presentations tonight or the recording could be available to us later. I know that means a lot of work for you and Professor Derek, but I will be grateful if they could be available later.
We will send it to you. So we will send it to you, Dr. Alvin. Thank you very much.
It shall reach you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Alvin. We will go to Dr. Lincoln. Dr. Lincoln.
You can unmute yourself, Dr. Lincoln.
Lincoln Ferreira. Dr. Lincoln is the president of the Ibero, Latin American and Caribbean Medical Confederation in Brazil.
Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Russell DeSouza, for the kind invitation. Also, my congratulations to all the lecturers. I've had the opportunity to learn a lot with you. And talking about such a vast region of the world, that means Central America, Caribbean, South America, and the Iberic Peninsula, it is a little bit difficult for me to establish some kind of standards. For sure, in our meetings, the point of ethics, the point of bioethics, and the absolutely necessity to see medicine not only a science, but an art, but with humanism and ethics, it's a point we share in common. But our social and relationships are absolutely not homogeneous in South American, Caribbean, Latin American, and for sure the Iberic Peninsula. There are different levels of social and political evolution among our countries. And all discussion here points me for an instance for what happens to some colleagues in Central America. Then when there are some riots against the local governments, and the doctors had doing their duties in their hospitals, seeking for people that had been affected by the manifestation. And they're just looking for, they're taking care of them. And they were charged of participate of a terrorist act. So that means ethics really changed from time to time, from region to region. And of course, what happened in the Second World War, Dr. David Barn has, in his words, said, we must learn, we must record, we must not repeat. But also my friend Angelique Coates from South Africa said, it remains. And for sure, we not discuss it with the importance that it has, particularly in my country, in Brazil. I think none of our more than 300 medical schools had it as an isolated item of their curriculums. So we must have a lot of words here. And I finished my very broad considerations doing to the region I'm representing here with the words of Ottmar Clover, that as a doctors, in fact, as leaders, as opinion formers, as an educated one, we are not allowed ethically, morally to hide behind laws, behind the political stated by the authorities that eventually are in charge in our countries. Thanks a lot for the attention. I'll be, of course, at disposition for further considerations. Thank you very much. Have a very nice day. Have a very happy and I think better year of 2021 for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lincoln.
Thank you, Lincoln.
That's so true. What you say, for different countries, there seems to be a different yardstick when it comes to ethics. And it also depends on the political regime and what Dr. Alvin in Hong Kong was saying, that at the same time when the Nazi experiments were going on, there was the Japanese Unit 731, which was happening, and they were not judged, whereas the Nazi doctors went straight on trial, and the outcome was different. So, and I also agree with what Dr. Angelique said. It's still continuing. And we are not doing, have we really progressed in terms of understanding from our history? Thank you very much, Dr. Lincoln.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Deborah, for bringing in here your region of Latin America and the Caribbean.
May I call upon, before I call Dr. Sheena, I'd like to ask Dr. Jack McIntyre if he'd like to say something. Because Sheena is an ethicist, so before I thought I'll finish all the doctors first and then have Sheena at the end. Dr. Jack, would you like to add your thoughts on this topic that we are discussing? You can unmute yourself, Dr. Derek. You'll have to. I've sent you a request, Dr. Jack, to unmute yourself. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Right. I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Mary, thank you very, very much. And this has been a wonderful presentation. And I agree with comments of others who have said that this is one of the most important presentations I think that we've had. And all of the presentations I have found to be excellent. And the message in terms of what we need to do as clinicians, I think is very, very important to be shared as widely as possible. So this is an excellent presentation. The one part that I think we need to be cognizant of also is that many of these ideas have run through society for not only generations, but for millennia. Beginning with ancient Rome and Sparta, and some of these concepts in terms of what later developed into the formal philosophy of eugenics has been very, very, prominent throughout civilization. In Rome, where babies who were felt to be somehow didn't look quite right were drowned in the Tiber. Even Plato talked about the importance of ferreting out those who were not up to standards and deciding who would live and who wouldn't. And in the United States, the eugenics philosophy was incredibly popular in the first part of the 20th century. And Davenport and his work at Cold Springs Harbor and others were just phenomenally recognized as at that time as making a lot of sense. Now, obviously, it reached its highest, the atrocities that we're talking about in terms of the Holocaust, but we have to recognize that some of these notions have been prominent in society for millennia. And we need to be constantly on the lookout for different policies that demean individual people because of frailties or problems that they have, and the tendency of society to reject these individuals. Our focus in terms of medicine is crucial in terms of paying attention to not only folks who are deemed by others to be less than normal, and then somehow not entitled to some of the same whether it be healthcare or other things that the other citizens are. So I think these are crucial lessons for all of society in general, but in the medical profession in particular, because of the power that we have, as was described by a number of folks. It's very, very important that we educate and we continue to remind ourselves and our students of the importance of the individual person and our responsibility to them, regardless as to what deficits or difficulties they may have.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah. May I ask Dr. Sheena?
Sheena, do you want
Yes,
to
hello.
Yes. Thank you
can
for
you hear me,
waiting.
I assume?
Thank
Of
you for
course.
waiting.
And I have heard a lot, so I'm trying to think about what I can say that's kind of new and novel. So I think I'll just reflect on my own experience and my own little area of expertise. We've heard from a number of Americans already. So I will just reiterate what everyone has said about the importance of teaching medicine and the Holocaust as part of medical education, and I would say broader health education. And having webinars like this and people like Dr. DeSouza and everyone that is on this panel and webinar is so important to really getting that education out there. And I think especially for everyone in the US watching everything unfold recently and neo-Nazi imagery on our TVs, we're kind of more motivated than ever to prioritize this type of education. So I actually got into studying Holocaust medicine or medicine in the Holocaust by way of my specialty in military medicine. So I interpreted the atrocities of Nazi physicians as being in some ways a worst case scenario of when medicine and the military come together, and when we see medicine motivated by national security. And so I have actually been taking notes here in the comments as people share quotes about how much national security and wartime can change medical ethics. So I came to studying medicine in the Holocaust that way. And as part of that, I have really been motivated to provide this type of continuing medical education to military providers here in the United States. So I have done a couple of grand rounds, and it is always interesting, both in the continuing medical education that I do, as well as my education in undergraduate in the medical, to see how little is known about the Holocaust and how little is known about physicians' role in the Holocaust and just how intimate it was, or how instrumental it was. I do want to reiterate what some of the other panelists have said about students who have trouble learning from history. I think one of the things that I have noticed in my own experience is that there is this problematic and misinformed narrative that when we look at the Holocaust and the atrocities that happened there, that this was a unique problem to this population, to this moment in history. I hear a lot of students say, you know, this happened in Germany, this happened a world away, this would never happen in the United States. And so one of the ways that I have had success in really showing how important it is for them to learn about this and how it connects to them and to American history is by first focusing on teaching about that American connection to eugenics and then to what happened both in Nazi Germany and in Japan. panelists just mentioned. And creating and focusing on that connection is very powerful, but has also highlighted for me how much more education is needed, because I do often have undergraduates come up after and tell me that they shared the story with their family over Thanksgiving dinner or something, and that their parents didn't believe that eugenics was a problem here in the United States. And that has allowed me to focus in a little bit more on North Carolina. And that's something that I want to mention briefly. At my institution, we don't have a specific course on Holocaust medicine for our medical students. And we don't even have a specific course on research ethics for our medical students. We do, however, have a research ethics course that is mandatory for doctoral students. And that does include a number of sessions on the history of human subjects research and focuses in on the Holocaust and what happened there. But I would love to see that broadened, have been a part of an initiative that is aimed at broadening Holocaust education in a lot of the ways about kind of getting it in as possible. So in a very cool turn of events that I didn't know when I first moved to North Carolina, is that North Carolina is one of the only states that has a council on the Holocaust. This state level council actually organizes teachers' workshops that are focused on various topics within the Holocaust. But I have been most recently involved with one that was called Deadly Medicine, and it focused on biology teachers at the middle school and high school level to talk to them about eugenics, about physician complicity in the Holocaust, what physicians did in the Holocaust, and give them tools and activities that allow them to weave that story and that part of history into the unlikely place of biology class, instead of having it just housed in social sciences or in history. And I think that is really the key to get this and to talk about the Holocaust whenever we can, instead of avoiding it or instead of putting it only in kind of Holocaust studies classes. Besides that, everyone has really said
everything.
The points over the last 2 hours.
Thank you, Dr.
Exactly.
Sheena.
So I will end just by thanking everyone and thanking you for being part of this.
Thank you, Dr. Sheena. Just a last thought for everyone. This is what happens when when I go and teach ethics, and we start about the Holocaust and tell them about the Nazi war, crimes. And then everyone goes away thinking, oh, they were so bad, the Nazi doctors were bad. But I think we should start, when we start teaching ethics, we should also focus on our own country first. And because it gives a view when you start teaching only about the Nazi war crimes that, we are good and they are bad. But we should also focus on individually on our country first, and then, talk about what's happening in the rest of the world. What is your opinion, Sheena, on that?
I think that that's really important. And it gets at, I think, what is one of the most difficult ethical questions, which was raised at the very beginning, I think, by Stacey, which is how caregivers can become killers, or how a profession trained to be a part of this caring profession with its own ethics is supposed to give care, how they can end up as killers. And I know that there are, of course, many different arguments and opinions about how this happened. But I think that one of the ways that we can understand it and prevent it is by understanding that it was part of a broader global phenomenon known as eugenics and racialized medicine. This normalized and legitimized a lot of behavior that then we saw go crazy in the Holocaust. So in my own teaching, I of course focus on things like the Tuskegee syphilis study, some stuff by Henry Beecher, to show that this is not a problem over there. This is not a them problem. This is an everyone problem that we need to grapple with and learn from.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sheena, because this is what we do when we do our courses in the International Certificate course. We teach about the Nazi war crimes and everything, but then we do, for our Indian students, we do have a separate section on the transgressions of research ethics in India, so that they're because otherwise they think everything is in the West and nothing happens in your own country. So it's very important for us to, also look inward first before we talk about what is happening outside. So thank you very much to all our panelists and all our speakers. It's been wonderful. I think Dr. David Barb has left us, I think. And,
he just left. He just listened his word.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe Dr. Ottmar can give some concluding words if he's there. Dr. Ottmar?
Just to add to what Dr. Mary said, for our courses, the Department of Education, we have certificate courses. We have now introduced, because we have students from all over the world, Dr. Princey looks at transgressions in every region to bring this home, that it was not just the Tuskegee, or it was not just the, it is things happening in every transgressions in various areas. And I think, Mary, that's an important point that you brought, that in all this, we need to focus on everyone rather than one, whether it's the Nazi or whether it was the Tuskegee or whether it was so forth. Yeah.
I think we can ask before we ask Dr. Ottmar. Dr. Ottmar, I think Dr. Stacy wants to say something before.
Is there something, Stacy?
Stacy,
Yes,
you want to say?
please.
And
Yes.
Dr. Derek, could you please unmute Dr. Ottmar also? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we end on a hopeful note. This has been such a wonderful conversation and has included so many people from all over the world, which I think is so important. Just to your point, Dr. Mary and Sheena, this is something that has happened everywhere and continues to happen everywhere, and we all need to be involved. So rather than this just being a conversation that we have today or just a conversation that we have this week, I want to encourage everybody to get involved. We shared some information about programs that are happening later in the week. We've talked a little bit about the UNESCO's Department of Education, the International Certificate course. We also have a Department of Bioethics and the Holocaust through UNESCO. We work together to run educational programs. But I think the important thing is to keep this conversation going. We have a lot of very, very passionate people in the field who want to help. So if you are interested, please use this as a call to action to start a program where you are. We can help. We're working on a book right now, Bioethics in the Holocaust, a comprehensive study in how the Holocaust continues to shape the ethics of health, medicine, and human rights. We're developing a multimedia curriculum. We're working on immersive experiential learning, where we take not only students from medical schools, but also students, undergraduate students, college athletes, to Auschwitz, to South Africa, to learn about these things, because we have to combine both education and advocacy. We have to make sure that when we see injustices like this happening, we stand up and we speak out. So in addition to saying thank you to everyone for being here, I really just want to invite you to stay engaged in this conversation. We are all here and eager to help in any way that we can. So please, let's use this as a starting point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy. I think we'll give the final words to Dr. Ottmar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary. This again has been a very excellent lecture. I really enjoyed the discussions which you have made and the comments that have been made. I think I didn't find anything that I wouldn't agree with. What I would like to say is we at the World Medical Association, we deem, of course, the historic perspective always very important. Important to learn from where we came and where we may want to go to. But for us, it's also important to look into the future and into the now. And to that extent, I must tell you, we are far away from being in an ideal world. All of those problems which we have discussed now, they are still on our plate. And unfortunately, at the World Medical Association in our office, we are dealing with those questions, human rights violations in medicine, where physicians are perpetrators. Those questions are on our plate now, and they are not going away. So we have to deal with that. The education is important. The public discussion is important. but most important is also our stance for democracy and freedom, because a lot of this is directly connected to authoritarian systems or authoritarian thinking, even in our very democratic nations. So those are things which I would like to remind you and give you a forward-looking. Your work, the work you're doing in medical ethics is of high importance for what the face of medicine will be in the future, and how good and how ethically correct we can perform as physicians and deal with our patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ottmar. That's a beautiful ending to today's webinar. I'd like to thank all our panelists. Dr. Jailal could not be there with us to give the Indian perspective, but we thank him all the same. Dr. Angelique, Baroness Finlay, Dr. Alvin, Dr. Lincoln, Dr. Sheena, and of course, Stacy and Dr. Mark and Dr. Matthew, and Dr. Ashley, and of course, to Dr. David and Dr. Ottmar for coming and joining us in this wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Mary. As we all said, this was a wonderful start, but as Stacy says, this is the start, and we continue the conversation, we continue what we've been doing, and particularly in the background of all what's happening, we are still grappling with what we started in March of last year. We are no different or not changed much in terms of the pandemic that brought us all together in solidarity. And this continues to be our goal, and we will continue with the conversation here, particularly as Ottmar said, this is an important place that we, forum that we have, bringing the medical profession, the healthcare. So we have in this program nurses, we had the physiotherapists, we had the pharmacy, we've had economists come together, and I think we brought all this together ultimately with dealing with understanding the suffering. How do we deal with, and I'm particularly interested on the importance of compassion that we are now talking about. Dr. Ilora has brought this up, the importance of compassion. Never before, or at least in our time, that we've had to deal and see the importance of compassion being dispensed, compassion being seen, compassion, and I think about what is the definition of compassion. I was reading, it is the ability to see suffering and have the authentic desire to relieve suffering. And I think that's what we've all, taken up in the caring profession that we all set out to do. So I want to thank all the wonderful speakers, the one who got up at 5:30, and we've got Des, Kyle, and myself and others in Australia already in the next we are already on 25th. Again, this is solidarity. So thank you all. We started well. We have our next webinar on the, I think, 7th, Sunday the 7th of February, and we'll send you all the details. One important, I want to thank, and I want us to reflect, whatever we've had. So in this in our programs, we brought people together, colleagues together from the world. Even it was 100 or 80 or 90, this group comes from every part of every region of the world. And I'm delighted and very proud and very happy to welcome all of you to continue with this solidarity that we built over time. And to all the committee and others who contributed to this. So thank you all once again. And
thank you.
For
and
everything.
Thank you. I forgot to thank Dr. Jack McIntyre. Dr. Jack,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Jack comes in and is very, very important here. And Professor Kami, thank you. Amnon Kami, thank you very much for being there with us right through. We appreciate that very much. Okay, so stay safe and stay well till we meet again on the for the 7th of February. We'll come back to that. Yes. Thank you and bye-bye. Bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's been
Thank
fantastic.
you,
Thank
Barbara
you.
and Elora.
Thank you, Sheena. I don't know if I forgot to